This is TOS Television, your digital first for an African news network. I am Adesu Suyi, and this is Africa Now. Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia are at a deadlock after the latest round of African Union-led talks with foreign and irrigation ministers of the three nations to resolve their years-long dispute over a controversial the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that Ethiopia is building on the Blue Nile River. However, the 4 days of meetings which concluded on Tuesday was without a breakthrough after Ethiopia rejected a Sudanese proposal backed by Egypt to include international mediators in the talks. Egypt and Sudan said. Egypt's top diplomats said they would again take the disputes to the UN Security Council. Ethiopia's foreign ministry in a statement asserted that Ethiopia cannot enter into an agreement that will foreclose its current and future legitimate rights over the utilization of the Nile. Meanwhile, Sudan's foreign minister Mariam Al-Sadiq Al-Mahdi said on Tuesday that without a new approach to negotiations, there becomes space for Ethiopia to impose a fiat accompli and put all the peoples of the region in grave danger, said Al-Mahdi. Sudan's irrigation ministry also criticized Ethiopia, saying it announced plans to add 13.5 billion cubic meters of water to the dam's reservoir this year. Is a real threat that cannot be accepted. Sudan and Egypt agreed on a proposal to include the European Union, the United States and the United Nations in the talks, as well as African Union mediators. But Egypt said Ethiopia rejected the proposal during the meeting, as well as other suggestions to restart negotiations. Somalia's international partners, including UN, the US, Canada and the African Union, and several European nations have called on the country's leaders to compromise to allow elections to take place in the country without further delay to allow Somalia to move forward. Noting the importance of the planned FGS-FMS summit, international partners urged that Somali-led and Somali-owned dialogue leads to the resolution of all outstanding issues and permit implementation of the 17th September electoral process. Such an agreement, symbolizing unity, compassion and care for others, will demonstrate leadership and concern for the Somali nation and offer a special Ramadan gift to the people of Somalia. The Constitutional Court of the Republic of Congo on Tuesday endorsed the re-election of President Denis Sassou Nguesso, who's 77 years old, in the March 21st vote for a fourth term after rejecting the opposition's appeal. Auguste Iloki, president of the country's highest judicial body, said the appeals for annulment and postponement of the presidential election are deemed inadmissible. During the election campaign, Sassou Nguesso placed peace, youth and the development of agriculture at the top of his priorities to get out of the oil and import dependency. He will face several challenges, including the fight against unemployment, which affects the majority of the population, especially young people. Access to drinking water and electricity remains the main concern of the Congolese population, with a growing rural exodus. President Sassou Nguesso will be sworn in the coming days for a fourth five-year term. Still in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the World Food Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization say 27.3 million people, about a third of the entire population of the Democratic Republic of Congo, face acute food insecurity, some 7 million of who are suffering emergency levels of acute hunger and have appealed for urgent additional funding to deal with the crisis. The most affected population are mainly the displaced, refugees, returnees, host families, and those affected by natural disasters, as well as female-headed households. Added to this are the poorest population in urban and peri-urban areas and those living in landlocked areas with low purchasing power and access to food through markets, the report said. Conflict remains a key cause of hunger. A slump in the country's economy, as well as the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 and militia violence that has persisted there for decades, are other main factors compounding the crisis. Upholding that social and political stability are essential to strengthening food security and boost the resilience of vulnerable population, is what Aristide Ngone Obame, FAO representative in DRC, said. The United Nations Refugee Agency UNHCR teams in Pemba said they have received worrying reports from displaced population that over 1,000 people fleeing Mozambique and trying to enter Tanzania were not allowed to cross the border to seek asylum. Also, UN agencies do not have access to Palma in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, the refugee agency said. UNHCR called on Mozambique's neighbors to provide access to territory and asylum procedures for those escaping violence and seeking protection. UN Refugee Agency spokesman Babar Baloch said the majority of new arrivals in Pemba, the province's capital, were women and children with few belongings, most showing signs of severe trauma following the atrocities they witnessed, and worried for those relatives who were left behind. The attack by the insurgent group known as Al-Shabaab on the coastal town of Palma has forced out at least 11,000 people, with thousands more reported trapped inside the area. This is your digital affairs from African News Network, TOS Television. You're watching Africa Now. Up next, health and business stories. After the break, do stay tuned. Welcome back. Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara has appointed his younger brother Tierney Birahima Ouattara as defense minister. Tierney replaces Patrick Achi, who has been confirmed as the country's prime minister. This was announced by Abdourahmane Cissé, Secretary General of the Ivorian presidency. The appointment of young Ouattara comes a month after Ouattara's party won the legislative elections. The political landscape in Ivory Coast currently has 41 ministers and 6 secretaries of state, and speculation is rife that the staff strength will be reduced. On several occasions, the Ivorian head of state has repeatedly spoken of his intention to initiate what he calls a generational renewal. According to media reports, the presidency is looking to make room for young people in his government. On health-related matters, President Samia Suluhu Hassan has announced that she was forming a committee to research whether Tanzania should follow the course taken by the rest of the world against the coronavirus pandemic. Let us have a stance, she told officials at State House in the commercial capital, Dar es Salaam, in a live broadcast after swearing key government officers. Hassan also announced that media that had been banned by Magufuli's government should be allowed to operate. President Samia Suluhu Hassan said on Tuesday she will form a technical committee to advise her about the scope of COVID-19 infections in the country and how to respond to the pandemic. In her address Tuesday to the country, Hassan also ordered media houses that had been closed during her predecessor's rule to be reopened. She also urged regional officials to encourage freedom of expression to allow members of the public to express their grievances without being intimidated. Kenya has exempted tax on a donation of HIV drugs that had been in the middle of a stalemate for 3 months, causing a shortage in drugs. The Finance Ministry said the exemption to the U.S. Development Agency, USAID's donation was made after the Health Ministry said millions of Kenyans who depend on the antiretroviral drugs were affected. The shortage was due to a tax standoff after USAID declined to import the drugs through the Kenya Medical Supplies Authority, KEMSA, citing corruption and mismanagement of the drugs. The agency opted to use a private company for importation and control-level distribution. According to the Ministry of Health, last year, at least 6,800 babies were born with HIV because their mothers did not take medication properly during pregnancy and after birth. In business, International Monetary Fund Chief Kristalina Georgieva on Tuesday said Chad's creditors will get together within the next week to deal with the country's request for debt relief under a new common framework agreed last year by the group of 20 major economies and the Paris Club of Official Creditors. She announced the move during a broader discussion about debt concerns during the spring meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. She said it was critical to increase transparency about countries' debt burdens and to involve all creditors in any debt restructuring or rescheduling process. Georgieva also urged countries to seek such debt treatment early to boost their chances to return to sustainable growth. World Bank President David Malpass told a separate event on Tuesday that the bank was moving forward with the IMF on Chad and hoped to be able to provide substantial fast dispersing resources for Chad. Like several other African countries, Chad is struggling with a high debt burden against the backdrop of the coronavirus crisis and low prices for oil, its major export. Private sector activity in Kenya fell to a 9-month low in March as companies registered a slower pace of output growth and sales and rising fuel prices led to increased product cost, a survey showed on Wednesday. The market's Stanbic Bank in Kenya Purchasing Managers Index as a PMI fell to 50.6 from 50.9 in February. The 50.0 mark separates growth from contraction. Businesses highlighted that cash flow problems linked to the COVID-19 pandemic meant that households often limited spending to essential items, Stanbic said in comments accompanying the survey. As a result, sales grew at the slowest rate since last November, with firms also seeing a loss of momentum from export orders. Output increased at the slowest rate for 9 months. The survey said the increased fuel costs led to another sharp uptick in purchase prices, driving further pressure on firms' margin. In mid-March, Kenya's energy regulator announced that the maximum fuel prices to mid-April would rise. In late March, President Uhuru Kenyatta restricted travel in the capital, Nairobi, and four surrounding countries to curb record levels of COVID-19 infections. The resurgence hit demand growth, which resulted in households conserving cash and prioritizing spending to essential items. Kuria Kamau, fixed income and currency strategist at Stanbic Bank, said. And that is Africa Now. For more updates, visit our website at www.tostvnetwork.com. Do also follow and like our social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember to subscribe on YouTube. Do stay with us and enjoy more programs on TOS Television Network. I am Adesuwa Osuyi. Thank you for watching.